Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're doing a deep dive into a really crucial chapter of India's freedom struggle, and this one's especially important for all you UPSC aspirants out there. We're talking about the Ghadar Party. What makes this story so fascinating is that it's a revolution with a twist. It wasn't born in the heart of India, but thousands of miles away, on the coast of America.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. We'll start at the very beginning, looking at its origins. Then we'll get into their core beliefs, the main leaders, and of course, the revolutionary stuff they did. After that, we'll look at the legacy they left behind, and, importantly, why things didn't quite work out in the end. Let's get into it.
All right, so the first thing you have to wrap your head around is the location. How on earth did a movement for India's freedom get its start in San Francisco, of all places? What was going on that pushed these Indian expatriates to launch one of the boldest revolutionary movements against the British Raj from so far from home?
At its core, the Ghadar Party was this incredibly ambitious plan cooked up by Indians living abroad, mostly Punjabi immigrants over in the United States. You see, they used the political freedoms they had in America to organize a revolution back in India, something that would have been impossible. It would have been crushed in a second on Indian soil back then.
You know, the name of the party itself tells you everything you need to know. It actually came from their weekly newspaper, which was called Ghadar, and that word literally means revolt. And they were not subtle about it at all. The very first edition had this headline right on the masthead, Angrezi Raj Ka Dushman, which means enemy of the British rule. This wasn't some polite request for change, this was a straight-up declaration of war.
So, what kind of India were they actually fighting for? Their vision was so much bigger than just getting rid of the British. They had this whole blueprint, a really detailed one for the new India they wanted to build.
And when you look at their goals, you realize just how radical they were for their time. Yeah, they wanted an armed revolt and an independent India, but look closer. They were calling for a totally secular state, one that would unite people across all those bitter religious and caste divides. And on top of that, they wanted to improve life for the poor and the working class. This was a profoundly progressive vision. Of course, a movement this big doesn't just happen. It needs leaders. So let's take a look at the key people who were steering the ship. A really interesting mix of intellectuals, former soldiers, and just incredibly passionate patriots.
You can see from this table they had a pretty well-organized structure. You had the respected elder statesman Baba Sohan Singh Bhakna as the president, which gave them a lot of credibility. But the real intellectual engine, the voice of the revolution, was Lala Dayal. As general secretary and the editor of the Ghadar newspaper, he was the one shaping the message. This clear division of roles really shows you how serious they were.
So, they had the ideology, they had the leadership. Now what? How did they turn all these big ideas into actual action? Well, their strategy was basically twofold. First, a massive propaganda campaign to get people on their side, and second, getting ready for a direct armed rebellion.
If you look at the timeline from 1913 to 1915, you can see things escalated really quickly. The start of World War I in 1914 was the moment they'd been waiting for. They figured with Britain totally distracted by the war in Europe, it was the perfect time to strike. But notice the challenges popping up at the same time, like their main ideologue, Lala Dayal, getting arrested at the absolute worst possible moment.
And then this happened. The Komagata Maru incident was a massive turning point. The Ghadarites were already getting their anti-colonial messages to the passengers on this ship. So when these Indians, mostly Punjabis, were blocked from entering Canada, another part of the British Empire, and then were met with bullets when they got back to India, it just laid bare the brutal reality of colonial rule. For the Ghadar Party, it was a huge propaganda win, and it made people furious with the British.
This all leads up to their biggest gamble, the Ghadar Mutiny of 1915. The plan was just breathtakingly audacious. Thousands of Ghadarites would sail back to India, bring weapons with them, and spark a massive, coordinated mutiny inside the British Indian Army. They even issued a formal proclamation of war. But the whole thing was doomed. British intelligence had gotten inside their network, and the rebellion was crushed before it even really began, leading to tons of arrests and executions.
So yeah, the mutiny failed. But does that mean the whole Ghadar movement was a failure? Not a chance. Its real impact, its true success, lies far beyond the battlefield. Let's dig into its lasting legacy.
Ultimately, the Ghadar Party's biggest win was ideological. It took India's freedom struggle and put it on the world stage. But even more importantly, its fierce commitment to a secular and equal society. This idea of uniting Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs in one common cause. That became a powerful blueprint for the next generation of revolutionaries. You can draw a direct line from their ideas to freedom fighters like the legendary Bhagat Singh.
Okay, but for a complete picture, especially for those of you prepping for exams, we have to look critically at why the movement failed in its main objective. Understanding where they went wrong is just as important as celebrating what they stood for.
When you look closer, the reasons for failure are pretty clear. These were passionate patriots, for sure, but they totally underestimated their enemy, the sheer power and organization of the British Empire. They also misread the situation in India, thinking the people were ready for a violent uprising when they weren't. Their coordination was messy, and British intelligence exploited that weakness, arresting leaders as soon as they landed. It basically cut the head off the snake before it could even strike.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big question to think about. What if they'd actually won? What if this incredibly well-intentioned but ultimately flawed revolution had succeeded? If India had become independent through a violent, secular, and socialist-leaning revolt right in the middle of World War I, just imagine how different the subcontinent might look today. It's a fascinating thought, and it really helps put the Ghadar movement's brave attempt into perspective.